Hello, everybody, and welcome to Daily Wire HQ. I am your host, Cabot Phillips. In just a few short minutes, we will be going live to the White House for the first press briefing since President Donald Trump's historic joint address to Congress last night. Every single press briefing is important, but this one is extra important because our very own White House correspondent, Margaret Olohan, will be front and center. Margaret is always in the room, but today she'll be attending as a special guest of White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, and Margaret will be sitting in the special new media seat down front. Now, for the last 4 years, we all know, under President Biden, the White House excluded new voices in media like the Daily Wire, while promoting their allies in the legacy media. Whenever the Biden White House did hold a press briefing, which was historically rare, I might add, it was the same liberal journalists from the same legacy media outlets asking the same softball questions. But no more. Donald Trump promised on the campaign trail to elevate alternative voices from across the media landscape, and he has done just that, welcoming in podcasters, social media influencers, and reporters like Margaret to the briefing room, offering new transparency that we did not have in the past. So an exciting day. Stay tuned. You do not want to miss it. This is going to be a great press briefing, and we've been hearing some rumblings from the White House that Margaret is going to get a little bit of extra airtime today. Do not miss that. Stay tuned right here. But first, if you're not a Daily Wire Plus member, what are you doing? You are missing out on ad-free, uncensored shows from the most trusted voices in media, like Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, Andrew Klavan, Jeremy Boring. You know the drill. Watching on YouTube, Spotify, or iTunes, well, you're not getting the full daily show. You're missing out. Only Daily Wire Plus members get all of that, plus exclusive members-only content that you're not going to see anywhere else. You also get live chats, exclusive investigative journalism, and if you are a member, you'll get first access to what is next. You can join right now at dailywire.com/subscribe. Do that right now. Go join. I will give you a virtual high five. I'll hop in the chat. You can join us in the chat if you're a Daily Wire member, so make sure to do that. Now, while we wait for the press conference to get going, we have got plenty of news to catch up on. You may have heard, but Donald Trump gave a little speech last night. It was actually a huge speech. It was his first joint address to Congress since retaking the Oval Office. Now, we call it a joint address. It's technically the State of the Union, but when a president is giving their first address to Congress since coming back to the White House, it's called a joint address. But for all intents and purposes, this was the State of the Union. And we heard a lot from Donald Trump, literally a lot. At 1 hour and 40 minutes, this was the longest presidential address to Congress in American history. It beat out Bill Clinton's address by about 18 minutes. And if you're Donald Trump, why not take some extra time to soak in the moment? If you're Trump, the man who was shot in the head, persecuted by the courts, smeared by the media for the last 4 years, you've kind of earned the right to give a triumphant address to the American people. And Donald Trump did just that. And though he did speak for quite a while, he probably could have gotten through the speech a good bit quicker if he were not being, interrupted every 30 seconds by Democrats. Now, all of us watching at home, you could hear the constant heckling and the constant jumping in from Democrats trying to disrupt the speech. But according to Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh, both of whom were in the room sitting front row up in the gallery, they were guests of Speaker Mike Johnson, they said that the microphones at home did not even pick up how much heckling was going on from the Democrats. They said that it was even worse than you could hear, that they were trying to throw Trump off, trying to disrupt him. Obviously, it did not work. Not only, though, did the Democrats refuse to stand up or even applaud for anything Trump addressed, they stayed seated and stoic for moments about capturing terrorists who'd killed Americans. They stayed seated, did not clap when it was announced that there were American prisoners who had been released in Russia and that they were there in the audience. They did not even clap for 13-year-old brain cancer survivors who were being honored. They did not clap for 18-year-olds who'd lost their parents in the line of duty and were now being accepted into West Point. All of that happened last night. They didn't clap for any of it. What they did do was stage a number of protests. First, a few dozen female members on the left wore matching pink outfits to, quote, protest Trump's policies, which are negatively impacting women. It was an amazing sight to see the color coordination that will really show Trump. Also kind of funny, back in 2019, the Democrats led by AOC did the exact same thing where they all wore white. That really showed Trump. They realized, wait a second, Trump is back. We haven't stopped him with our matching outfits. What can we change? Let's go with pink outfits instead. Maybe that will make a difference. Narrator hops in here and says that did not make a difference. It's also a bit ironic that they were wearing pink to protest his treatment of women. These are the same people who earlier in the day in D.C. voted against a bill that would have barred men from competing in women's sports. Again, a bit ironic, but I digress. Those matching outfits were just the start. Throughout the evening, dozens of other members held up signs throughout the evening with words like liar, Musk steals, this is not normal, etc. But most notably, there were also a number of loud outbursts and boos. And in really a truly stunning moment, one Democratic member, Al Green, stood up and yelled at Donald Trump in the middle of his speech. This was not just a short outburst either. King ignored warnings from Speaker Johnson and continued to scream for 60 seconds or so and was forced off the floor by the House Sergeant-at-Arms. It was wild. It was unprecedented. Have a watch at that moment where Al Green causes a scene.
Mr. Green, take your seat. Take your seat, sir. Take your seat. Finding that members continue to engage in willful and concerted disruption of proper decorum, the chair now directs the Sergeant-at-Arms to restore order. Remove this gentleman from the chamber.
What a hero. You know that Al Green, like when he was doing that, he thought of himself as like this freedom warrior. He thought of himself as the Tiananmen Square protester standing in front of the tank, refusing to budge. That is what he considered himself, but ultimately all he did was make himself look like a fool. Afterwards, Rep. Green took a victory lap with the media, soaking up his 15 minutes of fame, saying he was prepared to face any punishment he would receive. Again, so brave. And Speaker Johnson, for what it's worth, says punishment will be coming. After the address, he said that Green would face censure in the House for his actions. And it's worth noting, the American people did not exactly take too kindly to those Democratic outbursts. According to a CNN poll, their poll found 80% of viewers thought the Democratic interruptions were inappropriate. We'll see how that plays with the American people. Again, Democrats causing a scene, acting like children throughout Trump's address. Now, typically, a president's first address to Congress is largely focused on what they're going to do in the future. But this one was different. Trump started things off by listing off what his administration has already accomplished in the 6 weeks since he took office. And as we expected, he started by touting the record decrease in illegal border crossings last month, his first full month in office. According to the government data, last February, 2024, under Joe Biden, there were 140,000 illegal border crossings. 140,000 in 1 month. That is equivalent to the entire population of Syracuse, New York, in 1 month. But this February, Donald Trump's first full month in office, there were 8,450 illegal crossings at the border. 140,000 last February, 8,000 this February. That means that Trump's first full month in office saw the lowest number of illegal border crossings for any month since, get this, at least 1968. There's a good chance that we've never seen a month like that in modern history, but there weren't records being kept in the decades in the early part of the 20th century. Here is Trump touting that historic decline and that historic securing of the southern border.
And we quickly achieved the lowest numbers of illegal border crossers ever recorded. Thank you. The media and our friends in the Democrat Party kept saying we needed new legislation. We must have legislation to secure the border. But it turned out that all we really needed was a new president.
Bars, Donnie T. We didn't need new legislation. All we needed was a new president. I would encourage everyone at home to go look up the charts showing monthly border crossings. You've got hovering down at the bottom when Trump was in office, and then you see this enormous spike that lasts for 4 years. and then all of a sudden the arrow just falls off a cliff. That is the impact of Donald Trump being back in office. He rightfully is taking a victory lap there. Again, we are waiting for the White House press secretary to take the podium for a very important press briefing from the White House. Again, our very own White House correspondent, Margaret Olohan, will be a special guest of Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. We've heard some rumblings. We were talking to Margaret this morning. She will be the special guest, sitting in the new media seat front and center. She will have a chance to talk to the administration, ask some important questions, so make sure you stay tuned. And if you have any ideas for what Mary Margaret should be asking, go ahead, throw them in the comments section, throw them in the chat on the DW app or dailywire.com. I will give Mary Margaret a text and let her know some of the questions you guys are suggesting, but a lot to come here. So stay tuned, just a few minutes, you're not gonna miss it, we'll get you there. But for now, let's keep recapping what was a historic night in Washington. Gosh, I just keep thinking, as I was watching the State of the Union, can you imagine if we were having to watch Kamala Harris give a joint address to Congress? If Kamala Harris were the one taking the victory lap, if it was Nancy Pelosi or Hakeem Jeffries or Tim Walz sitting behind President Kamala Harris, how painful that would be to endure. Whew, it's got to shiver up my spine, but good news, we don't have to, because Donald Trump won, and it was J.D. Vance and Speaker Mike Johnson standing behind him on the podium. So let's, again, hit some more of the highlights while we wait. Trump also went on to laud the accomplishments of DOGE while pointing out particularly egregious examples of government waste that his administration had uncovered. And what was probably the funniest part of the night, he took the time to read off the craziest things our government is spending money on. These are all real examples. Let's have a watch.
$22 billion from HHS to provide free housing and cars for illegal aliens. $45 million for diversity, equity, and inclusion scholarships in Burma. $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants. Nobody knows what that is. $8 million to promote LGBTQI+ in the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of.
Just Trump being Trump. Again, everybody, we're waiting for the White House press conference to get going. Now, since Donald Trump's historic address last night, this will be the first briefing, first chance to hear from the White House on a number of big issues: Ukraine, tariffs, immigration. So don't go anywhere. We got a lot more coming. Mary Margaret, again, will be sitting front and center, and we'll get a chance to hear from her and Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. A big morning at the White House. And it was a big day yesterday here at the Daily Wire, as our own Ben Shapiro made it clear that we are taking on one of the woke left's greatest accomplishments, as they call it, and we are going to tear it down. Back in 2020, Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was railroaded during the George Floyd trial. The evidence was and is clear. His trial was a sham driven by media pressure, political threats, and mob justice. And Ben Shapiro, yesterday, for the first time, called on President Trump to pardon Derek Chauvin. And if he hears from enough of us, the American people, he just might do that. Trump has already taken action and made good on his promise to free political prisoners targeted by the Biden administration. Derek's federal conviction was a disgrace, a political sacrifice to appease the mob. We all know it. Anyone who has looked at the details, looked at the evidence, knows it. If we're serious about undoing the damage of the last 4 years, this fight has to be fought. The Daily Wire has delivered major political victories before. This is a reminder. The fight, though, is not over. We are leading the charge again and launching, with Ben Shapiro at the helm, a full-scale push for justice. Go to pardonderek.com. That is pardonderek, DEREK.com right now. Sign our petition. Tell Donald Trump that you want to see justice and you want to see Derek Chauvin pardoned, and you want to see this situation remedied and the horrific miscarriage of justice, the placing of Derek Chauvin on the altar of wokeness and social justice. It was wrong then, it's wrong now. It's time to remedy that situation. Ben Shapiro leading that charge. All right, let's get back to Trump's big speech last night. I could just sit here and play clips all day long. I've been watching them all night. I stayed up till 1 a.m. just watching highlights from the speech. It's like when your favorite team wins a big game. can't get enough of the highlights. That's what Trump's speech was last night for so many people. The American people also gave it very strong reviews. According to CNN polling, 69% of viewers had a positive reaction to the address, just 31% had a negative reaction. CBS had even stronger findings for Trump. Their poll had 76% approval for the address, just 23% disapproval. 68% said it made them feel hopeful, and there were also an overwhelming number who approved on the issues. 77% of Americans who watched the speech said they liked Trump's plans for addressing waste in government spending. 77% liked his plans for immigration. 73% liked his plans for Ukraine. And 65% support his strategy on tariffs. And 100% say Cabot Phillips is the best personality at the Daily Wire. I don't know where that came from. Sorry, that wasn't supposed to be in the prompt. I'm just having fun. We're having a good time. Anyways, the list, though, goes on. People were big fans of Donald Trump's plans last night. And while the Democrats refused to clap or acknowledge Trump's historic accomplishments, the American people were big fans of what they saw. So let's get to some more of those highlights. One moment that got a lot of attention came when Trump announced for the first time the capture of one of the masterminds behind the Abbey-gate bombing that killed 13 U.S. service members during the horrific botched withdrawal from Afghanistan under President Biden. That moment was incredible. Let's watch it.
Tonight, I am pleased to announce that we have just apprehended the top terrorist responsible for that atrocity, and he is right now on his way here to face the swift sword of American justice.
Again, worth pointing out, you can see on the other half of the screen there on the right, Democrats not standing up, not even clapping, not even pretending to be happy that a terrorist mastermind who killed Americans and hundreds of other Afghani civilians is apprehended. They're not clapping for that. Trump went on to address the war in Ukraine following that contentious meeting with Vladimir Zelensky last week. According to Trump, Zelensky is willing to come back to the negotiating table and end this war swiftly. Have a watch.
Nobody wants peace more than the Ukrainians, he said. My team and I stand ready to work under President Trump's strong leadership to get a peace that lasts. We do really value how much America has done to help Ukraine maintain its sovereignty and independence. Regarding the agreement on minerals and security, Ukraine is ready to sign it at any time that is convenient for you. I appreciate that he sent this letter, just got it a little while ago. Simultaneously, we've had serious discussions with Russia and have received strong signals that they are ready for peace. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Wouldn't that be beautiful?
Powerful stuff there on Ukraine. Now, just a reminder for everyone who's just now joining us, in just a few short moments, could be any minute now, I'm watching the screen. We have the feed from the White House live. We will be getting to the first press briefing since Donald Trump's historic address last night, where Daily Wire White House correspondent Margaret Olohan will be featured prominently. We're very proud of Mary Margaret. She's been doing fantastic work. Go follow her on X. Keep up with what she's doing on dailywire.com. She has been breaking scoop after scoop, exclusive after exclusive from the Trump White House. She is one of the best in the biz. We're proud to have her here at Daily Wire. So again, we'll be getting to that stream very, very shortly. Now, President Trump had a message last night for the Democrats who were refusing to clap for him. He looked at them and, again, as they remain seating, and it's important for context here, in past State of the Unions, even when President Biden was in office, however strongly Republicans felt about what a terrible job he was doing, there were still examples where both parties were willing to say, hey, certain things are not political. We can stand up and clap for this. Certain things we can find some common ground on. We don't disagree on 100% of issues. And there was a certain level of decorum and respect from both parties. Again, even when Biden was in office, there were some issues Republicans were willing to give a hand for, because ultimately we are still Americans. Last night, that was not the case. On issue after issue, you could forgive Democrats for not standing up for Donald Trump, touting some of his culture war issues, which you can understand why some of the far left radical Democrats would be afraid of their constituents and not want to clap for that. But there's where Democrat members refusing to stand up or even acknowledge cancer survivors that were there, the families of murdered victims who were killed by illegal immigrants, the families of American prisoners held wrongly in Russia who had just been brought home. There were children whose parents had been killed in the line of duty that were there, that were honored. Democrats did not clap for any of them throughout the night. President Trump had a message for those Democrats. Have a listen.
And once again, I look at the Democrats in front of me, and I realize there is absolutely nothing I can say to make them happy or to make them stand or smile or applaud. Nothing I can do. I could find a cure to the most devastating disease, a disease that would wipe out entire nations, or announce the answers to the greatest economy in history, or the stoppage of crime to the lowest levels ever recorded. And these people sitting right here will not clap, will not stand, and certainly will not cheer for these astronomical achievements. They won't do it, no matter what. Five times I've been up here. It's very sad, and it just shouldn't be this way.
Now, President Trump taking aim at the Democrats. I love how at the end of that clip, they show the Democrats who were just sitting there stone-faced. A number of those Democrats rolled their eyes when Trump was introducing some of the really heartwarming, inspirational stories and guests that were there in the audience. Trump saying, hey, I could cure cancer. I could take crime down to zero. You guys would still not like me. You still would not give me the credit. And frankly, he's right. Now, one of the other things that President Trump broke news on last night was his plan for reciprocal tariffs. Now, in layman's terms, this just means that whatever rate a country is charging the United States for imports, if they're charging us 20%, Trump's saying, okay, we're going to match you at 20%. If they're charging us a 10% rate, we're going to implement a 10% rate. That is what President Trump announced. We weren't yet sure, though, when those tariffs would go into place. Trump announcing last night they would be April 2nd. Here he is breaking that news.
And whatever they tariff us, other countries, we will tariff them. That's reciprocal, back and forth. Whatever they tax us, we will tax them.
One of my favorite parts there that we didn't get to play, Trump said that he was going to implement these tariffs on April 1st, but he said, I'm a little bit superstitious, and so I don't want to do April 1st. I want to do April 2nd. He didn't want it to be on April Fool's Day. It reminds me of Michael Scott in The Office when he says, I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious. That is President Trump. Now, as we wait for the White House press briefing to get going, I see some of you guys here in the chat saying, what's going on? We're running behind schedule. Guys, they got a lot going on at the White House. Yeah, they're 8 minutes behind schedule. I'm sure you've never been 8 minutes late to anything. We're going to give them a little bit of a break. It's okay if they're a little late. Don't worry, we're watching. You haven't missed anything yet. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt and others from the Trump administration will be taking the podium very shortly. Don't go anywhere, because we still have more Trump highlights from last night to get to. One of my personal favorites, Trump taking aim at diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, saying they are dead in America. The era of woke is dead. Let's play that clip.
We've ended the tyranny of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion policies all across the entire federal government and indeed the private sector and our military. And our country will be woke no longer.
I love the clip there. Ilhan Omar not very happy with the idea of DEI being eliminated from the federal government. Democrats not happy with Trump on that issue. The American people, though, do support President Trump's efforts. We've seen a number of polls come out where the vast majority of Americans are supportive of the idea of eliminating DEI requirements, DEI quotas, saying you have to hire a certain number of people based on race, or saying that you can't hire people based on their race. President Trump pushing for a merit-based system. Now, again, we're waiting for the White House press briefing to get going here from the White House. So let's get you caught up on some of the other big news, and that is Ukraine. President Trump vowed that when he took office, he would end the war in short order, and he has been taking steps to do just that. Now, last week, it seemed like things were going very smoothly, like things would be happening very quickly. Earlier in the month, President Trump sent a contingency to meet with officials from Moscow. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was there and others. They had productive discussions. Trump said, before we do that, we're going to work on a minerals deal with Ukraine. President Zelensky had signaled that he'd be willing to sign that deal until he came to the White House last Friday. We've all seen what happened at that meeting. President Zelensky lecturing the United States, rolling his eyes at President Trump and J.D. Vance, showing very little gratitude for the hundreds of billions of dollars that America has offered his country to help them survive this invasion launched by Vladimir Putin. Now, coming into Friday's meeting, basically everyone believed the U.S. and Ukraine would sign that minerals deal and the stage would be set for a ceasefire and formal negotiations. Now, for context, that minerals deal that everyone keeps talking about, what is this minerals deal? President Trump, really an ingenious idea here, has said, hey, we've given you guys hundreds of billions of dollars. We have cleared out our munitions depots to help keep you guys alive. You're going to have to pay us back in some way. So Trump's saying, hey, once the war ends, you guys might not have a lot of cash sitting around, understandably. So we're going to work out a deal where you guys will give us a cut of future revenues from energy and mineral deals. Ukraine has some of the largest untapped fields of rare earth chemicals and rare earth minerals. They have large untapped oil fields, natural gas fields. Trump's saying, hey, you guys aren't actually doing anything with that land. Why not put some money into developing that land and then give the United States a cut? So Trump had worked out a deal with Zelensky where all new natural gas and rare earth mineral leases in the future, that the United States would provide contracts, the United States would provide infrastructure to help get those resources out of the ground. Again, they're not being touched right now. The United States would help Ukraine get those resources out of the ground, and the U.S. would get to keep 50% of revenue. That money would be put into a trust that the U.S. could then have access to. So it's a win-win for the Ukrainians. They're getting a huge chunk of money from energy and from resources that they're not actually using, and the United States is being made at least somewhat whole. It would take a lot of money to make the U.S. whole for all the support they gave. And that minerals deal would give billions of dollars back to the U.S., and that minerals deal would ensure a sort of buffer to keep Vladimir Putin out of Ukraine. Zelensky has said that he would not agree to any deal that did not include a security guarantee. He wants the U.S. to promise that if Russia makes any incursion into the U.S., that there would be a response from NATO and a response from the U.S. specifically. He wants to see boots on the ground from European countries, and he wants the U.S. to put in writing, hey, we're going to make sure that Putin doesn't come back in. President Trump, though, is saying, hey, why do you need us to put it in writing? Why do you need a security guarantee? This minerals deal will be the security guarantee. We're going to have all sorts of resources on the ground. We're going to have American companies. American interests will be in the eastern part of Ukraine, right near the border with Russia. That's your security guarantee. Putin's not going to come in because he knows the United States is on the ground protecting our interests. That is the security guarantee. But that apparently was not enough for Zelensky, who blew up saying that he wanted more from the United States despite all of the resources the United States has already given him. Now, after that disastrous event at the White House, everything changed. Zelensky went to London a few days later seeking financial support from Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And he told reporters when he got back to Europe after leaving the United States that a peace deal with Russia is, quote, still very, very far away. No one has started all these steps yet. So Trump's saying, hey, we have a deal on the table. You guys can come sign this minerals deal. And then from there, we'll work out a ceasefire. And once the ceasefire is in place, we will work out final negotiations to end the war. But Zelensky backtracking, saying, no. We're actually not that close. We're far away. Not exactly the words that you would expect from a man who wanted to stop the killing. Thousands of Ukrainians and Russians being killed every single day. The death toll, over 1 million at this point. The bloodiest conflict since World War II in Europe. And Zelensky seemingly not showing a lot of urgency to get a deal done. Now, that outraged Trump, understandably, who said there could be a peace deal right now if Zelensky were willing. He posted on Truth Social, quote, "This is the worst statement that could have been made by Zelensky. America will not put up with it for much longer. This guy does not want there to be peace as long as he has America's backing." Trump's point and the point of the White House is, hey, Zelensky knows that as long as we are keeping the tap running, as long as we're continuing to give him resources, he doesn't really have an incentive to try and end the war. You'd think that he'd have an incentive wanting to end the killing of his countrymen, wiping out an entire generation of young men like what we saw during World War I and World War II. But apparently that's not enough of an incentive. Trump went on to elaborate on his relationship with Zelensky, talking about what it would take to restart those mineral deal negotiations, saying, quote, "I just think he should be more appreciative because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe. I want all of those young people to stop being killed." And it's worth pointing out when it comes, again, we're still waiting for the White House press conference to get going. Don't worry, you're not missing it. I'm not just pontificating here, keeping you guys from the press briefing. We'll get there in a minute. But it's important to point out something Trump touched on last night with regard to Europe. They talk a big game about supporting Ukraine. They talk a big game about how the United States is not doing enough to support the Ukrainians in their war effort. They talk a big game, even though Ukraine is the one that's on their doorstep. We have an ocean separating us. You'd think that Europe would have much more of an incentive to support the Ukrainians, but instead they're telling the U.S. what to do. Last year, as President Trump noted in his State of the Union or joint address last night, last year, Europe gave more money to Russia than they gave to Ukraine. I'm going to say that again. Last year, Europe gave more money to Russia than to Ukraine. They gave about $18 billion to Ukraine for the military effort. They gave over $20 billion to Russia in exchange for their natural gas and oil. Europe, over the last few years, has made themselves totally reliant and subservient to Moscow for energy. Europe has shut down nuclear facilities. Europe has shut down new drilling. Europe has passed a slew of absurd energy regulations and absurd climate change regulations. And in doing so, they have made themselves completely reliant on Russia. And now that they don't have any of their own energy independence, they are relying on who they say are the bad guys in this conflict, and they're relying on them for their oil and for their natural gas. And they are essentially propping up the Putin regime and helping line their bank accounts with money. And it's also worth noting just how little money Europe has spent on this conflict and how little resources they have to offer and how they are completely reliant on the United States. Even Prime Minister Keir Starmer from the UK admitted this week that without the United States, there would be no ability to protect Ukraine from another Russian invasion. They all know behind closed doors that the United States and that President Trump are the only ones who can bring a lasting peace in this conflict. They all know that without the United States, Ukraine would have been overrun years ago, literally, but they still want to virtue signal to the rest of the world saying that it's wrong that the United States wants to end this conflict and that President Trump is somehow siding with dictators and Putin for wanting to end this conflict. Just a reminder for everyone at home, you don't have to think that Vladimir Putin is a good guy. He is not a good guy. You don't have to think that the Russians were justified in their invasion of Ukraine. They were not. You don't have to think those things to think that this war should be brought to a swift close. And that is what President Trump is trying to do. He's trying to end this conflict, but Europe is meddling. President Zelensky, again, not willing to come to the table. And now Donald Trump is taking concrete steps to pull back aid for Ukraine to try and incentivize them to come to the table once more. This week, the Trump administration has frozen the financing of new weapons sales to Kyiv, and they could potentially halt all shipments from American stockpiles. This means that any weapons that are not already in Ukraine across the borders are being stopped. There's a lot of stockpiles that are waiting in Poland that are going to be crossing the border into Ukraine. The White House saying, nope, no more new weapons, because they don't want the Ukrainians to think that the United States is just an endless supply of resources. According to European officials, without any new weapons from the United States, Ukraine would, at its current pace, have enough resources to last until this summer. So we're still waiting for the full details of that plan, but it does seem like Donald Trump is trying to force Zelensky to the negotiating table. According to Donald Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, quote, Zelensky is not ready to talk peace at all, but here's the problem. Time is not on his side. The American people's patience is not unlimited, Their wallets are not unlimited. Our stockpiles and ammunitions are not unlimited. So Donald Trump last night from the State of the Union, or from the joint address. I keep saying State of the Union. It basically is the State of the Union, as we talked about earlier. We just have to call it the joint address because tradition says so. They say that a president in their first 2 months in office is not able to fully give a State of the Union assessment because they haven't been in office long enough. I would argue that Donald Trump has done more than enough during his 45 or so days in office to determine what the State of the Union is. But again, I digress. Trump last night read a letter from Zelensky where Zelensky appears to be giving in a bit and saying, what have I done? Trump saying, hey, I'm looking for an apology here. I'm looking for you guys to admit that you were wrong. I'm looking for you guys to come back to the table, end this war, but you got to admit that you guys were wrong in coming here and disrespecting the United States in the Oval Office. And Zelensky sort of doing that yesterday. He wrote a letter to President Trump saying, hey, I support the United States. I appreciate all that you guys have given us. It was unfortunate what happened in the Oval Office, just kind of getting to the edge of an apology. It's like, you know, you're in an argument with your wife or your kid, you're in an argument with your parents, and you know you're wrong, and they're looking for an apology, and your wife is saying, okay, you're going to apologize, and you get as close as you can saying, it's unfortunate what happened, even though everyone knows you're in the wrong. That's what Zelensky was doing in that letter. But he wrote to Trump saying, we are now willing to sign that minerals deal. We are now willing to come back to the table. Trump reading that from the State of the Union. All right, guys, we are about 20 minutes late. It's okay. We're not going to be mad at the White House. They've got a lot going on. Again, President Trump, this is the first press conference from the White House since President Trump's address last night. And Daily Wire White House correspondent Margaret Olohan is going to have a very special role. Again, the White House is offering more transparency to the media. Past White Houses have only propped up legacy media outlets. The only questions that they were giving were to the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN or NPR. Not this White House. They are giving questions to alternative media outlets like the Daily Wire and like our White House reporter correspondent Margaret Olohan. She will be sitting in a very special seat. She will be in the new media seat. And from what we're hearing, I don't want to spoil the surprise, but she is going to be playing a prominent role in this event. And here she is walking in right now. I see her taking her seat right front and center in the new media seat. They've just walked her in, so this means that Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt will likely be taking the stage very, very shortly. Again, we are going to go live from the White House here in just a minute. I want to get now to one of the most powerful moments from last night's joint address to Congress. We'll play this clip. If it ends up that this press conference starts, don't worry, we'll get you out of the clip. You won't miss anything. But this was the moment that 13-year-old brain cancer survivor DJ Daniel, whose lifelong dream has been to be in law enforcement, this is the moment that he was made an honorary Secret Service member by the president. Let's have a watch.
The police love him. The police departments love him. And tonight, DJ, we're going to do you the biggest honor of them all. I am asking our new Secret Service Director, Sean Curran, to officially make you an agent of the United States Secret Service.
All right, things are getting going. Let's go to the White House right now. Karoline Leavitt, Press Secretary.
So I look forward to taking your questions on it. But first, I want to talk about President Trump's historic and incredible speech last night. The American people and the entire world watched President Trump powerfully lay out how he's renewing the American dream in a record-breaking joint address to Congress. And Americans loved what they heard. According to a CBS YouGov survey, an overwhelming 76% of those watching approved of President Trump's speech last night. The president spoke about how he's taken more than 400 executive actions on his key promises. The expectations were high, and President Trump is exceeding them. According to brand new polling from the Daily Mail, President Trump has never been more popular as his approval ratings are reaching historic highs. More Americans believe America is headed in the right direction than the wrong direction. Everyday Americans love this president because he tells it like it is, no matter what, and he did that last night. President Trump level set with the American people on the economy and exposed how badly Joe Biden screwed it up by causing the worst inflation crisis in 4 decades. President Trump was honest about where we are while making clear that help is on the way. As the president declared last night, he will make America affordable again. Last night, you also saw who motivates the president to work so hard. Everyday Americans, who President Trump shined a spotlight on last night in his speech. From Mark Fogel, who President Trump was finally able to reunite with his family and his beautiful 95-year-old mother after being detained in Russia, to Peyton McNabb, whose heart-wrenching story motivated President Trump to end men in women's sports, and to Allison and Lauren Phillips, the mother and daughter and sister of Laken Riley, who President Trump honored by signing the Laken Riley Act to ensure her name will live on forever. In other amazing and surprise moments, President Trump honored the life of Jocelyn Nungare, who was brutally murdered by illegal alien gang members. He ensured Jocelyn will never be forgotten by renaming a national wildlife refuge in her home state of Texas to honor her life. And in one of the greatest surprise moments of the night, DJ Daniel, an incredible 13-year-old boy who is beating brain cancer, saw his dreams fulfilled by President Trump when he was made an honorary Secret Service agent. And finally, after nearly 4 years, President Trump delivered justice for the families of the 13 American heroes who were killed at Abbey Gate in the Biden-botched Afghanistan withdrawal, which was one of the worst humiliations in the history of our country. President Trump announced that we have detained Mohammed Sharifullah, the monster who was responsible for that horrific attack, and he was delivered to Dulles Airfield earlier this morning. On his first day in office, President Trump's national security team across the federal government prioritized intelligence gathering to locate this evil individual. President Trump's team shared intelligence with regional partners such as Pakistan, who helped identify this monster in the borderland area late last month. Mohammed confessed to his crimes related to Abbey Gate and other attacks in Russia and Iran as well to the Pakistanis. And U.S. law enforcement officers traveled to Pakistan over the weekend, where he again confessed his crimes to the FBI. As President Trump said last night, this killer will now face the swift sword of American justice for these atrocities right here on United States soil. Joe Biden was responsible for this botched withdrawal, and he had 3 years to find this evil terrorist, and he didn't even try to get the job done. But President Trump campaigned on behalf of and grew very close to the Gold Star families. He promised them accountability, and last night, he kept his promise. He spoke to those Gold Star families yesterday, ahead of his speech, in an incredibly heartwarming call to share this incredible news. And as President Trump asked in his speech last night, how could anyone possibly be opposed to any of this action that he is taking? Well, apparently, the modern-day Democrat Party could. The behavior of Democrats last night was completely disgraceful and demonstrated how severely out of touch they are with the American public. It was the most shameful moment in the history of presidential addresses in that beautiful chamber. In what was supposed to be a unifying moment for our country, Democrat members of Congress instead screamed at the President of the United States, who was just overwhelmingly reelected by their constituents, walked out of the chamber, and worst of all, they disrespected the American people. Democrats didn't stand to keep men out of women's sports. They couldn't even clap for a girl who got her head smashed in by a man on a volleyball court. Democrats didn't stand for an innocent and beautiful child who is surviving brain cancer. They opposed eliminating taxes on tips and Social Security. They didn't stand in favor of cutting taxes for hardworking Americans. They couldn't even clap for 2 mothers whose daughters were killed by illegal aliens. One of the only things that could get Democrats off their feet last night was cheering for Ukraine, not for America. Last night was a very clarifying moment for our country. The Democrats exposed themselves as the party of insanity and hate, the party that wants to put America last. They've allowed their Trump derangement syndrome to stop them from celebrating America and our people. And we will not allow them to forget that. And it's not just the Democrat Party. The mainstream media still doesn't get it. Last night, MSNBC's Nicole Wallace disgustingly looped in a 13-year-old boy with brain cancer into an attack on the president over January 6th. And CNN's first chyron out of the speech called it divisive. President Trump wasn't divisive. The Democrats were. And CNN was proven wrong by their own viewers, 69% of whom, in a post-speech poll, said they had a positive reaction to the president's speech. It's sad and frankly pathetic that Democrats and liberals in the legacy media continue to allow their hatred for the president to override their love for our country. But nevertheless, the president will continue to unify this nation through policies that are grounded in common sense and that uplift all Americans. We have an individual in our new media seat today, Mary Margaret Olohan, who is the Daily Wire's first ever White House correspondent. Congratulations, Mary Margaret. The Daily Wire was founded 10 years ago by Ben Shapiro. The Daily Wire now has over 1 million paid subscribers, a monthly network reach of 138 million, and has evolved into a leading conservative multimedia giant. They are now the 5th largest podcast network in the world and home to some of the top-ranked shows. With that, I will take your questions, and Mary Margaret, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's great to be here.
Thanks.
So I had 2 questions, if that's okay. The first
Sure.
on last night and the second on Maine. You talked about behavior from Democrat lawmakers, a lot of disruptions, and I just wanted to kind of go back to that. We saw Democrat lawmakers not stand for Laken Riley, for Peyton McNabb, for the son of a slain police officer and 13-year-old cancer survivor. What are the optics of that nationally, just in terms of not just the people who were in the room last night, but across the nation? And also, was President Trump expecting this type of behavior when he was crafting his speech?
So I gave a quote to one of the media outlets in this room yesterday that Democrats behaving like children would be the least surprising thing of the night. And unfortunately, that quote did turn out to be true. I think the president and everyone, frankly, was surprised by the Democrats refusing to stand for not the president's policies, because frankly, we expected that, but for the everyday Americans who President Trump was shining a light on their stories. Mark Fogel, for instance, an American school teacher who was detained by the Russians. President Trump freed him. If Joe Biden had done that, they all would have been on their feet, but because of it came from President Trump, they weren't. So we think it's very sad, but we're very proud of the president today, and the American people are the people that this president cares about most, and the reviews are in, and everybody loved his speech.
Thank you. And then on Maine, we know that the governor of Maine has really pushed back against the president's executive order saying that boys should not be in girls' sports. I spoke with a lawmaker from Maine this morning who told me she'd been censured by state lawmakers for calling a man and speaking up on this. What is the next move for the White House in this battle to protect the integrity of women's sports?
Yeah, well, the Department of Education has sued the state of Maine. As you know, there's ongoing litigation. The president has made a commitment to ensure that states are being held accountable if they continue to allow men in women's sports, which he believes is an egregious violation of taxpayer dollars. And so that fight continues, and the president won't back down. Again, this is a common sense policy. 80% of the American people, including more than 60% of Democrats, do not want men in women's sports. So the president will stand by this commitment. Thank you. Gabe, good to see you in here.
Good to see you, Caroline. A couple questions. One, can you confirm that the president held talks with the big 3 automakers today, speaking about potentially delaying tariffs?
I can confirm, and I'm glad that you asked, because the president sent me out here with a statement directly from him on this. I saw it was reported earlier today by Bloomberg News, and he wanted me to share this with all of you. We spoke with the big 3 auto dealers. We are going to give a 1-month exemption on any autos coming through USMCA. Reciprocal tariffs will still go into effect on April 2nd, but at the request of the companies associated with USMCA, the president is giving them an exemption for 1 month so they are not at an economic disadvantage. So the 3 companies that he spoke to are Stellantis, Ford, and General Motors. They requested the call, they made the ask, and the president is happy to do it. It's a 1-month exemption.
And the president just posted on social media that he had spoken with Prime Minister Trudeau. He says he's not satisfied with what the Prime Minister has said when it comes to fentanyl, but less than 1%, as you know, less than 1% of the fentanyl seized last year was in the northern border. What else does Canada need to do?
Well, the president did just put out a statement on his call with the governor, Justin Trudeau, as he calls him, of Canada. And he said that he was not pleased, as you said. He said it's not good enough. He told Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that directly. The call ended in a somewhat friendly manner, as the president said, but he's not going to stop standing up for the American people. And to answer your question directly when it comes to fentanyl, for the last 4 years, unfortunately, our neighbors to the north and the south, Canada and Mexico respectively, have allowed America to be a dumping ground, not just for illegal aliens, but for illegal, poisonous, deadly fentanyl, which is now the #1 killer of young people in this country aged 18 to 34. Through the northern border in Canada, in last fiscal year alone, there was enough fentanyl seized to kill 4.8 billion people. And that number is up 2,050% from 2023, the year before. So there's been more than a 2,000% increase in illegal fentanyl seizure at the northern border. Why? Because Canada is allowing that fentanyl to come to the United States. The president sees these numbers. He thinks about the lives that are lost. And everybody in this room, I'm sure, everybody watching at home, everybody across the country knows someone in our lives who has been killed at the hands of this deadly poison. There needs to be repercussions for that. The president feels very strongly about it.
Caroline, respectfully, it's just 43 pounds that were found last year. That's less than a carry-on suitcase. Is that a lot of fentanyl compared to, say, Mexico, where the vast majority of the fentanyl is brought in through Mexico, not Canada? So what else does Canada need to do?
Well, I just told you, last year alone, there was a 2,000% increase in illegal fentanyl.
But it's only 43
You're asking me,
pounds,
you're asking me for what the president's justification is for these tariffs. It's not up to you. You're not the president, Gabe. And frankly, I think it's a little bit disrespectful to the families in this country who have lost loved ones at the hands of this deadly poison. If you talk to them, and this president has, they are grateful that they finally have a president who is standing up to both Canada and Mexico, and most importantly, to China as well. The president added an additional 10% tariff on China because this deadly poison is being produced in that country. It's being distributed through our neighbors, and there needs to be consequences for that, period. Peter.
Thank you, Caroline. If the U.S. has a longstanding policy that we do not negotiate with terrorists, then why is the U.S. now negotiating directly and for the first time ever with Hamas?
Well, when it comes to the negotiations that you're referring to, first of all, the special envoy who's engaged in those negotiations does have the authority to talk to anyone. Israel was consulted on this matter. And look, dialogue and talking to people around the world to do what's in the best interest of the American people is something that the president has proven is what he believes is good faith effort to do what's right for the American people.
Is it just about the hostages, or are they also talking about the president's plan to take over Gaza?
These are ongoing talks and discussions. I am not going to detail them here. There are American lives at stake. I would defer you to the Department of State for further details, but I'm not going to get into those talks here at this podium.
We know that some officials here were miffed that Zelensky showed up last week without a suit for his meeting in the Oval Office, but Elon Musk never wears a suit in
He
there.
did last night.
So what is the dress code?
Well, Elon Musk wore a suit last night. I'm sure you saw it.
Was he spooked by the Zelensky getting kicked out?
No, I don't think so. I'm just pointing out that he did wear a suit last night, and I think the president liked that very much, and he looked great. Speaking of the president, he just passed me a note while I'm standing here. He wanted me to hold this up. This is the poll that I cited, the CBS YouGov poll that shows that 76% of those who watched the president's speech last night approved of his speech. And so it goes to my earlier point that I made in my monologue about how incredibly sad it is that we have a modern-day Democrat Party who is so severely out of touch with the American public. This is a great poll. The ultimate poll, though, came on November 5th when the president won by an overwhelming margin that he spoke about last night. Democrats weren't happy to hear that either. Ouija.
Thank you, Caroline. Back on tariffs, last night President Trump said there will be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. Can you put a dollar figure amount on how much the average American family should expect to pay as this disturbance? And why should Americans be okay with that when so many are already struggling to pay the bills?
Well, first of all, last night, the president told the truth. and he was realistic, and he level set with the American people. And I think, frankly, it's very refreshing, and everybody in this room should be very grateful that we have a president who tells the truth about the reality of the economic situation that we are in, unlike the previous president who lied to everybody's faces, saying inflation was transitory, saying it was under control, saying that the border was secure, when none of that was true. So the president is being frank and honest, and the American people elected this president to have monumental reform and change, including rebuilding our manufacturing base in this country, standing up to foreign nations who have been ripping off our country for decades. And that requires a little bit of disruption. That requires a lot of effort and work that this president is focused on doing. With that said, as the president said last night, his administration is wholeheartedly committed, of course, to ending the inflation nightmare caused by the Biden administration. Look at the deregulation efforts. Look at the president's push last night in his speech for Congress to pass tax cuts, to end taxes on Social Security and overtime pay for hardworking Americans, end taxes on tips. We need Congress to get that done because that's going to put more money back into the pockets of the American people. And I didn't even mention energy. Look at the president's approach and focus on unleashing the might of our energy industry. We know that's the #1 driver of inflation. He's been slashing back a lot of the burdensome regulation from the previous administration to unleash our energy industry here at home, which will drive down costs. He said he is committed to making America affordable again. He did it in his first term, and Americans can trust him to do it again.
President Trump has made clear, Karoline, that he loves tariffs, but the stock market does not. How does he factor that into his decision making?
Well, the president does love tariffs. He said it's one of his favorite words of the English dictionary, and he believes in tariffs because they'll ultimately make America rich again. They're going to raise revenue. They're going to help us pay down our debt. Most importantly, they're going to bring American jobs here back home. So I think for folks on Wall Street who may be concerned, look at what this president did for you in his first term. Wall Street boomed. Stock market boomed. The president expects that to happen again, but most importantly, Main Street is going to boom, and that's why the president has this whole of government economic approach, which includes tax cuts, tariffs, regulation cuts, and an energy industry that will bring down costs for American consumers. Sure, Monica.
Thank you, Karoline. You mentioned not one Democrat senator voted to protect women's sports from males. Not one Democrat congressman or congresswoman stood to applaud or support protecting women's spaces and sports at the president's joint session to Congress last night, as you articulately mentioned at the beginning. So I'm wondering, what message is that sending to not only young women who are competing in these sports across the country, but also to the parents of these young girls?
Yeah. I think the message that Americans should take away from last night is that they have a president in the Oval Office who is committed to doing what's right for them, especially women and girls across the country. And I think it's very ironic, thank you for bringing up the point about women, that Democrat women were wearing pink to support our fellow females, yet they couldn't stand, again, for a young woman who was almost killed and severely injured by a man on the volleyball court. They couldn't stand for the mothers of two beautiful young women whose lives were taken tragically at the hands of illegal people. So you can't say you're the party of women and then support men and women's sports and not stand up for basic law and order and immigration reform that will protect women in this country. That's what President Trump is doing. He's the president for women. Lindsay, good to see you.
Thank you, Karoline. Good to see you. So, speaking of tariffs, China said yesterday that they're ready for any kind of war with the U.S. Because of these tariffs that have been placed on them. And a Chinese spokesperson also said that the tariffs would not lead to a resolution of U.S. concerns about fentanyl originating in China. Can you speak to how the administration is planning on responding to that?
Well, I think Secretary Hegseth has responded to that this morning. He said that America will always be prepared to defend itself, especially under the leadership of this president in the Oval Office. And that certainly remains true. Again, when it comes to tariffs, the president has been very tough on China, not just now with 20% and more with the reciprocal tariffs that will hit on April 2nd. But look at what he did in his first term. There were billions of dollars worth of tariffs that he implemented on China. And it's quite telling that the previous administration did not rescind those tariffs because they realized the value that they had in not only deterring China, but also raising revenue here in the United States. Rachel.
Thanks, Caroline. Just a quick follow-up, two quick follow-ups on tariffs. The president mentioned a little disturbance during his remarks yesterday. The CEO of Target says that consumers will likely see prices go up on everything from strawberries to bananas to avocados. How long should Americans expect to pay higher prices? Are we talking a week, a couple of days, a few months?
Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I can assure the American people is that this president and this administration is doing everything they can. And I would remind you and everybody else in this room that it's because of the previous administration's economic policies that Americans were left with record high inflation. Inflation throughout Joe Biden's entire 48 months in office was at or above 3%. It hit record highs, as you know. And there's a whole list of what the Biden economic disaster this president was left to clean up. It's been a month, but he's working hard every single day to do just that.
One quick follow-up on the carve-out. Sorry to cut you off there. The U.S. imported $43 million worth of eggs from Canada. I know you mentioned some of the exemptions when it comes to automakers. Will there be any other carve-outs, including for eggs? We know prices are soaring for Americans.
The president is open to hearing about additional exemptions. He always has open dialogue, and he'll always do, what's right, what he believes is right for the American people. But again, as for the egg crisis in this country, the president is wholeheartedly committed to ensuring we're increasing our egg supply, and we're also bringing down cost. And Secretary Rollins has been all over this issue. She comes from an agricultural background and family. That's why she's leading that very important department. She wrote an amazing op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. She's been all over the media talking about her plan. She has a real plan. The president endorses it. And he even, gave her an off-the-prompter shout-out last night to say, Brooke, I'm counting on you. It's an important issue. And this White House is working with Secretary of Agriculture every single day to address this issue. Sure. Jordan.
Thanks, Caroline. So what does it say that the Democrats, while they couldn't stand for Americans or stand for victims, they stood for war and clapped for war and clapped for 5 more years of war?
Yeah, the president addressed that last night, I think, when he called out Senator Elizabeth Warren and said that, again, as I said in my opening speech, very telling that the Democrats refused to clap for American people and American interests and American priorities, but they did clap for the country of Ukraine, which, by the way, the president's working very hard to end that war. So Democrats should be applauding him for actually doing something about it.
Follow up on that if I can. You've spoken recently about how what happened in the Oval Office last week gave Americans an inside look into behind-the-scenes discussions with Zelensky. Is this how he treated Joe Biden and just treated him disrespectfully and received billions of dollars?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I don't know if anybody in here asked my predecessor who stood at this podium about that, but there was a report from NBC News that President Biden also got increasingly frustrated with President Zelensky when he was handing out blank checks and President Zelensky kept asking for more. Joe Biden was quite frustrated with that. So again, as I've said repeatedly, Friday revealed the frustrations that this administration has had in closed-door negotiations with the Ukrainians. However, President Zelensky did put out a statement yesterday, which we believe is a positive step forward. And National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has been talking to his Ukrainian counterparts. And so we're in the midst of this, and we'll see what happens next. Caitlin.
Thanks, Caroline. I have 2 questions. One on the reprieve that is being granted to these 3 automakers for 1 month on the tariffs on Canada and Mexico. How did the president settle on 1 month?
The reciprocal tariffs will go into effect on April 2nd, and he feels strongly about that no matter what, no exemption, so that's where the 1 month comes from.
Does he expect them to be able to shift production within a month?
He told them that they should get on it, start investing, start moving, shift production here to the United States of America, where they will pay no tariff. That's the ultimate goal.
And on the conversations between the White House and the Ukrainians and the letter that President Trump revealed last night that he got from President Zelensky, Director Ratcliffe said today that the president has paused also intelligence sharing with Ukraine. Is that temporary or is that permanent?
I believe what the National Security Council told me in regards to that was that they paused or they are reconsidering the funding for Ukraine, as you saw, the pause on the funding. As for intelligence matters, I would refer you to either the National Security Council or the CIA as well.
But they're considering lifting or reinstating the military aid going to Ukraine, which they paused this
Again,
week.
it's a pause for a review.
Follow up on that.
Sure.
The president read parts of the letter that he received last night from President Zelensky. Can you give us a sense of when President Trump now plans to sign that minerals deal after receiving that letter?
Those talks are happening as we speak. I just saw the National Security Advisor. He's working very hard on it. I believe he was going into the Oval Office to give the president an update on where this stands. But again, the president is committed to a peace deal. He wants to see this war end. And I think that President Zelensky's message, which he also shared on X as well, is a positive sign in the right direction.
The president also said that the United States was reclaiming the Panama Canal. The president of Panama this morning, or at some point today, said that President Trump was lying. Wanted to get your response to that, and also curious if the president had a reason for not specifically mentioning BlackRock last night when he was praising the company that is buying canals or ports around the Panama Canal.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Panama has seen what's going on with their own canal, but as you just mentioned, BlackRock is now interested in investing and taking over the two ends of the port, which is very important because the president was very vocal several weeks ago about the need to ensure that China is not controlling the Panama Canal. This is a very important place for the United States of America. We also saw that the Panama Canal lifted fees on our U.S. naval ships that are going in and out of the canal. That's a win for the United States of America, and the president will continue to ensure that the Chinese government, the CCP, cannot be infiltrated in the Western Hemisphere, and certainly not in the Panama Canal, which is a very important place for our country. Dasha.
The president continues to call the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, Governor of Canada. I'm curious what he means by that, and if there are any plans that are moving forward with trying to make Canada the 51st state. And I have a follow-up on the economy as well.
Sure. Well, the president put that in his True Social account, or his True Social post earlier today. He feels strongly that it would be very beneficial for the Canadian people to be the 51st state of the United States. They wouldn't be paying for these tariffs. They'd have much lower taxes if they were part of our great country.
Caroline, on the economy, you and I traveled the country during the campaign. This is an issue that so many voters decided to cast their ballots on, and they voted for President Trump. He has started to have that realistic conversation with the American people, that disturbance comment last night. But I'm curious if you can be real with Americans right now as all of these factors are playing out. Are things potentially going to get worse before they get better?
Look, I've now been asked and answered this same question, just given to me in different verbiage of 3 different times, and I will answer it again in an effort of transparency to the American people, because this is an important issue, and the American people, this president understands that it is. And again, that's why in his joint address to Congress last night, he addressed this issue with a realistic and honest approach. He talked about what this administration is doing to unleash American energy and to make America affordable again, and this administration is wholeheartedly committed to doing it. And I would remind the American public that the first-term record of this president speaks volumes. That's why they reelected him, because they know that he can fix our broken economy, and it's very, very broken from the previous administration. Stephen.
Thank you, Caroline. I've got 2 questions, one on press access, the other on fentanyl and tariffs.
Sure.
On press access, your predecessor, Karine Jean-Pierre, who presided over many novel press access restrictions, criticized the recent changes to the press pool made by your office. She said in an interview, quote, "What we're looking at is what North Korea is doing." What's your response to that, and can you say anything to allay concerns that unfavorable coverage will be punished in this new press pool system?
I think that's the same individual who said from this podium numerous times that the commander-in-chief was mentally and physically up for the job, which we knew was a lie. Many people in this room knew it was a lie. Many of you were admonished for asking questions about that truth. So when it comes to truth and transparency, this administration, this White House is setting the example. This president is taking far more questions than his predecessor, Joe Biden, did on a daily basis, and that will continue.
And on fentanyl and tariffs, fentanyl produced largely in China has killed 334,000 Americans over 5 years. According to CDC data, that's about 1 in every 1,000 Americans. President Trump has cited this for applying new tariffs to Canada, Mexico, and China. But in addition to China's talk about being ready for any kind of war, they said yesterday, the foreign ministry said that, quote, "The fentanyl issue is a flimsy excuse to raise U.S. tariffs," and, quote, "The U.S., not anyone else, is responsible for the fentanyl crisis." So what's the response to China that the talk of fentanyl is just an excuse for tariffs And what does that say about the resolution?
Well, of course, the country that is getting very rich off of distributing this deadly poison to American citizens is going to say that. Again, the president knows where the American people stand on this issue. Fentanyl overdoses. Dasha brought up all of us campaigning all across the country. They talked about inflation. They also talked about the border, the illegal immigrants that we're pouring through, but also these deadly drugs. And again, the president keeps in mind those families every single day when he is making these tough decisions. But it's a necessary decision, and he's no longer going to allow the United States of America to be a dumping ground for illegal immigrants and for illegal drugs that are killing our nation's people. This is the #1 leading cause of death in our country, and there needs to be action taken to ensure that that cannot continue. Thank you very much, guys. We'll see you later.
Thanks, Caroline.
Do we know what auto brands are actually exempt? So Honda.